Hi, I'm Kiran Vangaveti, founder and CEO of BluSapphire.
Give me an elevator pitch of BluSapphire.
It's hard to give an elevator pitch of BluSapphire without telling you a little bit about myself.
Mm.
Uh, so, I started my career, been in the IT industry for 25 years. Last 19 years have been specifically in cybersecurity. I work for Fortune 10 and Fortune 100 companies, leading large cybersecurity teams across multiple global locations in over 180,000, 250,000 kind of user base. Irrespective of where I was, my last gig was with Tudor Investments, $18 billion hedge fund as their chief information security officer. Irrespective of where I was, there was a problem statement that I constantly encountered. And the problem statement was not associated with the budgets or the people. It was necessarily about the capability of what I needed to do, I couldn't do. Essentially, in the security operations center, it took us a lot of time to actually look at the incidents, triage them, and if we wanted to respond, we were very limited with the capabilities that other tools provided, and we were very reliant. We couldn't design our own responses. This made me
Give
think
give me
there has to
gi-
be a better way.
give me an example. Like you're saying that this capability was not there with you to look at an
Mhm.
incident, triage, respond. Just can you help our listeners understand this through an example? And what do you
Sure.
mean by triage? And what are the kind of responses that happen? What are the kind of incidents that happen?
Sure. So when I was at one of these Fortune 10 companies, one of the world's largest employer, we were constantly under attack by nation state attackers. And we would see those artifacts, which in itself was pretty interesting for us. We would see those artifacts that
Now,
actually were part of
what's
the attack.
what's an artifact? Like my understanding of artifact comes from Indiana Jones.
It's actually similar to that. So when you say artifact, it's an indicator of compromise. And what is an indicator of compromise? It could be a registry entry, it could be a file entry, it could be a privilege escalation log that we are seeing, or a specific usage of a specific command, which is traditionally not done, or a new file in the entire ecosystem, which we have never actually introduced, probably a malicious file or something. It could be a file, registry entry, memory artifact, shortcut, browser artifact, which means that there was some activity on the browser, which we need to figure out what that activity was, and it is stored in browser forensics, and browser forensics is the only way to bring that data back. So the many of these, and it could be as simple as a log entry. And also something that all of us are used to is an antivirus alert going off. Right? It could even that could actually be an artifact. So irrespective of where we were, once we identified an artifact, for us to verify if that artifact was present anywhere else on the network, what happened before that artifact was generated, what happened after that artifact was generated, we're very limited in our capabilities to do that. And we have to jump from tool to tool to tool to actually get the data we need, because once I see something happening, and I'm, say, for example, I see a PowerShell downloading a script from an external party, and I'm like, okay, did that actually succeed? Did that connection succeed? I had to go back to the firewall logs to look at the data, and I had to parse that information. Proxy logs, because most of the time the data would actually get rerouted to proxy, or if it was an odd port, I need to know if the firewall allowed it or did it actually not allow it, and how do we actually make that determination.
What's a PowerShell?
PowerShell is a scripting language in Windows, a very popular scripting language in Windows, usually used for system administration, but can be used for malicious purposes. It
Okay.
is equivalent to what Unix, back in the Unix world, we would call shell scripting. Shell scripting was very popular, and Unix admins loved it, and they geeked out about how Windows is for idiots and Unix is for the intellectually superior human beings. Then Windows decided to address that problem finally and start doing something about it, and PowerShell was their answer.
Mm.
In fact, actually today PowerShell is used extensively by Microsoft also. So all the Windows interfaces that are built for administrators is actually built on the back end of PowerShell. So everything runs on PowerShell in a Windows environment today.
Okay, got it.
All
So
right. So
PowerShell is like an environment in which you can uh, access more things, and you can write some code to get higher level access than what the typical Windows UI
You
will allow
can automate a lot of things without actually having to go through, navigate through the UI,
you.
right?
Okay.
Think of it like a bad job. Right? Back in the day, most of us who have learned MS-DOS and others, we know what a batch scripting is, right? Think of it like batch scripting on steroids.
Okay.
You can do a
Okay.
whole lot of the activity in a more automated way, faster than what you could do in a traditional way. This is supposed to help the administrators, system administrators and system engineers, so they can actually do faster deployments across their environments and work with user requirements, so on and so forth, in an automated fashion rather than just point and click. Which is dumb, right? I mean, it would really take a long time for you to do something like a point and click to create 100 users or 200 users. And in large
Mm.
enterprises, it's very often that you have to create some 300, 400 accounts overnight. That's a nightmare, right?
Mm.
And you would actually use your own scripting to do that. That would make your job life a lot easier. So see things like that sort, right? You can actually script pretty much anything in Windows today.
Okay.
It's
Got it.
become very, very powerful and the most powerful entity that Windows has created. It became so powerful that the attackers have taken notice.
Mhm. Okay.
And they use that to attack because it is present in every system. It's automated. Not everybody knows how to use it. Not everybody has a decent logging mechanism on it, enabled by default. So attackers use it very often.
Okay. So you said you had to use like a number of tools. There was no single tool, but there were a number of tools that you had to use to triage. Now, what do you mean by triage first, and what are the tools that? Give me some examples of tools.
Basically, triage is actually understanding the data and understanding what happened behind an incident. And once an alert has been triggered, is that alert an incident or not? That determination has to be made. That is made through a process called triaging. Triaging is actually getting all the sources of truth, sitting together and understanding if this actually is an incident or it's actually a false positive. It's basically analysis,
Okay.
right?
So, like determining the severity and whether this is a concern or not a concern.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay.
So
And
that kind of triage would take a lot of time because we have to jump between tools to tools to tools. And a very simple example again, let's go back to the antivirus because a lot of people can relate to an antivirus alert on their systems. What happened before that antivirus alert triggered? It's great that the antivirus actually caught what was happening and it actually quarantined it. In most cases, it actually does succeed quarantining the system and actually gives an alert saying that I have quarantined A, B, and C, and you should be fine now. And that alert is actually received by the Security Operations Center in an enterprise. And an analyst takes a look at it, verifies that the quarantine was successful, and then closes the ticket. But that's not the full story. How did that actually file get there to get quarantined? What happened after that point? What happened before that point? These are all important aspects to understand if this was actually an incident or it's an isolated incident or what it is. Right? Was it a part of an attack? And only one part of the attack got caught, and we missed the entire rest of the attack because it went under the radar. What happened? That determination was very, very important. And sometimes it's also important that you may find an attack. And I'm asking myself the question, did it happen only on that system? Or I have 20,000 systems across my enterprise. Where else did this happen that we did not catch it? How do I get an authoritative answer on I see this attacker here? Is he hiding somewhere else on my network? There's no easy way to do this or get that data together. So performing the triage and then analysis and then figuring out a way to respond to that problem was becoming a nightmare. And we used to start writing our own scripts, and many times these scripts would take days to run. Attacker could actually finish his job in a matter of hours, and we would be searching for days and weeks across our enterprise. There's no easy way to do it. I mean, there were antivirus tools, there are EDRs, and so on and so forth, but we had to rely on what they told us rather than what we want out of that tool, which
okay.
means that we had to rely on the alerts that these tools were throwing. And if we saw something suspicious that we wanted it to catch, we have to upload the sample to the vendor and ask him to build signatures for that or build detections for that and then help us detect it. It was great. We were a Fortune 10 company, so the vendor would bend over backwards and try to accommodate us in a matter of 3 weeks, which is still too long. But what about others? right? So that's when I got out and said, there's a better way to do this. The problem is that we have evolved as multiple tools over a period of last 15, 20 years. But now there is actually technology currently available for you to build a single platform that can operate across the entire stack and give you visibility and build an automated storyline based on the data it already has. So when an analyst looks at an alert, the entire storyline is laid out for him. So in a matter of seconds, he can make a determination whether this is an incident or not. And how does he respond? Without relying on an agent. The problem in many enterprises is that your agents are not up to date. Sometimes they're not even installed. And 9 out of 10 times, the attacker is more successful at finding that particular system than anything else on your network. So it ends up that you have to defend something on which your agent does not exist. So we built a complete agentless model to actually be able to respond to situations like that.
Okay.
That became very critical for us based on the experiences I had both in large financial sectors, pharmaceutical sector, and so on and so forth.
What's an agent?
Agent is agent is it's an antivirus. Is can be called an agent. Your EDR is an agent, right?
What's EDR?
Endpoint detection and response.
Okay.
So it's part of an evolution of how cybersecurity evolved. Back in the day, we used to call it antivirus. Then somebody said, hey, you know what? Antivirus only depends on a signature. It's too old. It needs to be more modern. And we can detect this using machine learning models so you don't have to depend on updates. And then the machine learning model of antivirus became popular. They call them the next generation antivirus.
So
And all of a sudden, the attackers.
an antivirus essentially is constantly scanning your hard disk for comparing if there is any script or file which matches a database of threat or threatening files and
Yes,
scripts. Okay.
that is correct.
And
But it's
so,
very easy to change the what it is comparing against is hashes of a database, hashes of a file. Hash is a unique fingerprint of a file. Right? No
okay.
matter how many times you run it, the same file will generate the same hash, and it's like a fingerprint of that file.
Okay.
Right? It's like your identity. Right?
Okay.
Your identity is not you, but it is just a fingerprint of you.
Okay.
Right?
So an
So
antivirus will only work if the hash is an exact match, whereas if a virus is
yes,
capable of evolving and changing its hash, then it will not work.
yes, we
Okay.
call them polymorphic viruses, right? So they can actually change shape, change themselves constantly with every landing that they do. So very soon these antiviruses becoming irrelevant. So somebody said, hey, you know what? We have machine learning models that can actually look at the patterns and then tell you whether this is a virus or not, rather than solely depending on definitions. We used to call them antivirus definitions back then, right? Those
Okay.
are actually database of hashes,
Hmm.
right? And machine learning models became popular. And then we went into a model called next generation antivirus. It used to be called next gen antivirus. Then attackers wisened up. They said, okay, fine, you want to detect us that way. What we will do is we will use existing tools that are already present on your operating system. And we won't usually not download anything malicious, right? So there is a challenge, right? Even the machine learning models depended on detecting existing patterns of activity, not unknown patterns of activity. So if it's an unknown unknown is what we call it. If it's an unknown unknown, it becomes a challenge. You have never known about it. There was no pattern for your machine learning model to run, and then you cannot detect it, right? That was a challenge with the machine learning models. But then attackers are also wisening up. They are like, okay, fine, you're using machine learning models, you're using a combination of signature based detection, you're using a combination of those. So, what we will do is let's walk away from downloading anything malicious. Let's start using something that's already present in your operating system. It is like, I will not bring a knife into the airport. I will use something from one of the airport kitchens. So
Okay.
you don't have to pass
Interesting.
through scanners. I will use something that's already available for me,
Okay.
right?
Okay. Mm.
Right. So they're using something that's already present inside your environment because you're scanning everything that actually is coming from outside and you have pretty good, decent systems. So they said, okay, fine. What does your Windows system have? What does your Linux system have? It has many capabilities to actually destroy itself, just like anything else, right? So we call them LOL, living of the land binaries. So what that means is your operating system has a lot of functionality. You're probably just scraping the surface of it. 95% of us probably use it for email, video, and YouTube. That's probably covers the maximum extent, and browsing, shopping, so on and so forth. So basically, the browser, the email system, and probably YouTube video streaming. That's probably the extent of our operations in most cases. But your operating system is built to support a lot more than that. There are constantly updates happening across environments. Your system administrators are controlling your operating system behavior to fine tune it to your organization requirements. A lot of capability to self monitor and self maintain exists. And an attacker can use those existing binaries, which usually are never touched. You and me would never touch it. And there are probably hundreds of them. And he would use one of those to actually go exploit your own system. For example, if I want to upload data from your network to an external party, previously what an attacker would do is download his own tool set and upload that information, which essentially caused problems because now he's getting detected, right? But if I use something called BITS, Background Intelligent Transfer Service, that is built into most Windows environments, and in Linux there are other methods to do it. But let's focus more on Windows because a lot of us can relate to Windows environments, which is used by Windows natively to download Microsoft patches. Right? It's a very intelligent system. It can actually stop the transfer in between and start exactly where it left off. It can do all kind of broken downloading. It can download 10 kilobytes from this source, 20 kilobytes from that source, more like a BitTorrent. It can do a bunch of interesting things. Attackers just use that to download the data, which went completely under the radar, right? So many of these activities can be done using the native binaries. Well, there's a very popular command called "Who am I?" It tells you who is the current logged-on user, is it part of a domain, is he a domain administrator, and what are the other users that are logged on to this system. Everything is part of your own operating system. So attackers started using that, and they don't get detected anymore. Then came the world of EDR, endpoint detection and response. They said, okay, your antivirus is looking for malicious stuff. Attacker is not using malicious stuff. It's only using what is already present. So essentially, I need to look at all executions and determine what is malicious based on certain rules. And these rules should be dynamic. So we went from detecting hashes, fingerprints of files, to machine learning models, to also extending it to a rule-based model. Right? Then organizations become tired of managing the EDR systems and the antivirus system separately. There are too many agents that are coming onto the system. So they said, okay, fine. The market responded. They merged both the endpoint and EDR and became EPP, Endpoint Protection Platform.
Just give me examples of brand names also for like what's an EDR brand name I might have heard. Antivirus, of
So
course, there's like McAfee, Norton,
many
etc.
of us, McAfee, Norton, all of us remember. And when machine learning models and next-gen antivirus came in, it was purely a silence world, the world of silence, CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike is still present, but silence died in the hands of BlackBerry. But CrowdStrike was also a very strong contender at that point, and actually they were playing second fiddle to Cylance. But CrowdStrike pivoted into EDR, which Cylance did not. And then CrowdStrike also became a next generation antivirus and EDR put together to EPP. They're pretty much the leaders in the space. So CrowdStrike and Sentinel-1 will be your typical EPPs today. There are many more. Trend has caught up, Sophos has caught up, a bunch of others have caught up, but everybody's playing second fiddle to what these guys are doing. CrowdStrike undoubtedly is the leader in that space.
Okay, got it. So EPP
Right?
is
But all
essentially
of these, even within this advanced kind of models, you still can't tell it what you want it to do. It works based on what it was told to do. And if you wanted to do something, you have to go back to CrowdStrike and say, hey, I want to build this. Right? They're not extensible. Their data sets are not extensible. You don't have direct access to that data. If you want to correlate that information with something else, it only gives you alerts. It doesn't tell you what all it is looking for. It only gives you the alerts. So you're completely dependent on the alerts you're receiving. You have no intelligence, no say in what it is going to give you. These are all very rigid systems. And we thought there was a better way to do this. And that's how BluSapphire was born in 2017. We got an honorary mention in 2018 by Gartner, saying that we were thinking very differently from what the market space was thinking at that point in time. Lo and behold, 5 years later, today XDR is a very popular terminology, extended detection and response. So in between, MDR became a thing, managed detection and response, which is a MSSP service for EDR because it was
MSS.
that
What is
complex.
MSSP?
Managed security service
Okay.
provider,
Okay. Okay. Okay.
right? So that became very popular.
So that would mean there
And
would be like a call center in India or like a BPO in India where there's a human being who's looking at alerts and
yes,
in
yes,
conjunction with the
there's a
software.
security operations center run by these guys because EDR was very complex. It is actually still is very complex for a common person to understand. So it is usually run by a team of technology experts in a security operations center that became managed detection and response. Then today, the world is talking about XDR, extended detection and response. What that actually means is they finally realized that just looking at endpoint is not valuable because you don't know what your point of entry was versus what the attacker's point of entry was. But the single source of truth happens to be that a communication needs to happen, whether encrypted or not, and that fingerprint is available on the network. So if you're listening to your network, looking at the proxy data, looking at all the other logs, and combine that with the data on the endpoint, then you have a better footprint of what is happening, and you understand the storyline better. Right? A lot of these companies were pushing the agenda of endpoint is the EDR is the holy grail of all detection because all action is happening there. But whether we like it or not, we believed strongly back in 2017 itself. We said, no, that data is not enough. Unless you're trying to become a rocket scientist within that space, you're looking at a very narrow set of data and trying to make determination whether something is an attack, which is a problem because the more data you have, the better chances that you have of detecting something. The narrower you get, the more specialized you have to become for no reason. Absolutely no reason. All you have access to all of this other data, and you could have easily picked up. But instead, you actually decide to actually focus down on that narrow lane and then figure out how to become an expert in that is completely not valuable to the end consumer.
Okay. So in an
A lot of
EDR,
jargons, a lot of jargons, I know.
I'm going to recap it just so that I'm also clear on it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. An EDR is essentially looking at activity within the device with the end user, like say an employee of a company, the laptop that he uses. So it is looking at activity there. It is not looking at the interaction between that device and the network. That is what is currently missing, and that is
Yes.
what BluSapphire is doing. So you're doing both. You're looking at the device and the communication between the device and the network, or you're only looking at the communication.
So we're looking at everything, right? BluSapphire was born with the thought process that, hey, in this age of big data, back in 2017, I'm talking, today we all know big data. Back in 2017, I said, in this day of big data and, large scale indices available, it's a shame that we have to jump tool to tool to tool to make this determination. And it's also a shame that we have to depend on such a narrow set of data, which the consumer who has paid for the product does not have access to. So we started with what we called an open data platform. We built this large scale open data platform that's scalable to petabytes of data. And we built it on open schemas. So any of our customer can look into the data and understand the data as is without having to come back to us. So they can build whatever models they want on top of it. That's number one. Number two, we built it on the premise that you have to look at the entire operations in entity. Your organization is not working in silos. What I mean by that is your technology division is not running in silos. Your technology is not running only on endpoint, right? You have your proxy systems, you have your firewalls, you have your switches, routers, data centers, your Kubernetes platforms, your cloud centers, your hybrid mesh. All of this is working together, and you're trying to make a determination of whether something is malicious activity based on activity on only one of those components, that really doesn't make sense. Well, it does make sense, but that's not enough, right? So we need to look at all of these data points in unison and bring all of them onto a common schema. So I can actually build a storyline and immediately tell you that activity that happened on that endpoint, this was the prequel to it, and this is the sequel to it. Now you can make a stronger determination of what this is. Was it a general system administration activity, or was it actually an attacker activity, right? While we were busy doing that, MITRE came up with what we call a MITRE framework of all possible attacks that attack techniques an attacker can use against an enterprise to succeed. And they did a good job of understanding and providing information on all different kinds of techniques. So today we map against them, but that was the fundamental premise with which we got in, and we look at the largest set of data so we can tie all of these data points together.
What is MITRE?
MITRE. So they are actually a non-profit, I think based out of Europe. What they have started to do is looked at all these attacks going on and said, okay, we have no consistent way of mapping what the attacker is doing. I'm calling it a specific name. Another vendor is calling it something. A group of analysts are calling it something else, right? I may be calling it process following. Somebody else is probably calling it process emptying. Somebody else is calling it something else. Now, with that kind of understanding, we don't have a common way of understanding an attack together. So the same attacker activity, I'm defining it differently versus somebody else. So in order to be able to define attacker activity consistently across the globe, you need to understand the activity in a standardized form. So they started mapping all different ways in which an attack can happen. So let's take the example of a bank, right? You want to go rob a bank. And let's talk about physical bank. We were talking about the physical world, physical bank. Back in the day, we used to hear a lot of these bank robberies. What they did, in essence, was mapped out every single piece of technique that a bank robber can use to attack the bank, and mapped it out and said these are the only known ways to do it. Each of these technique can be used in multiple ways. And they said, okay, usually they come in wearing mask. Now it could be a muffler, it could be a brown bag, it could be Rajnikant's face mask, whatever it is, right? So that can be accomplished multiple ways, but the technique is hiding identity. Second one, there could be a car running outside, which is not shut down, which is parked in a place which is very close to the bank, ready for a getaway once the money is there. And there's a driver waiting in there for the folks to come back, and the engine is running. Now, that car could be anything, right? It could be a small buggy all the way to a container truck, right? But that is a technique, right? And they need access. They're going to spray paint your cameras so they don't get detected. They're going to come with bags. They're going to try to hide their identity, wear gloves, those kind of things. And in the cyber world, they've defined those kind of techniques and said when a attacker drops into a network, what are the things he does, right? So because he does not know your network, it is like a blind man dropping in a dark room. He needs to feel, touch around, and understand what's around him. Right? In our world, we call it reconnaissance, which essentially means he needs to understand where did he land first. What is it? Is it a Windows system? Is it a Linux system? Is it a Mac? Which user is this? Is this directly the admin desktop that I got, or is it some Pune or receptionist desktop that I got into? Or is it actually the CEO's desktop? He needs to make that determination. And then he needs to start fingerprinting your entire network so he gets a better understanding of what is available for him to exploit. Right? Then he launches his attack. But before he launches his attack, he will start building persistence. Now, persistence is just a fancy way of saying he will open up as many backdoors as possible. In case you detect this activity, he can come back through some other door. Right? So those is called, we call persistence. Then he decides what to attack. Once he decides what to attack, then he knows what resources to go after, what domain administrator tokens to go after, who has access to what database, what service account, where is it written. Some people write it in text files. Some configuration files actually have passwords, API keys to cloud. Some code usually has API keys that are hard coded into the code itself. They're going looking for all of that they can get access to. Once they have that, they steal data, which is then they'll package the data, they'll steal it out from right under your nose without creating big noise. Because if I start transferring terabytes of data outside your network, you will know, because your bandwidth will get choked. So it needs to be a very slow process. They'll bleed it out. Once they bleed it out, then it comes defense evasion, which essentially means I will try to cover my tracks. I will delete the logs as soon as they're created. I will delete every file that I have used. I will delete my working folders. I will delete everywhere that I packaged my data. So I will erase my footprints. Right? And then I'm gone. Usually it is called impact. What that means is either you walked away with the data and started selling it in the black market, or you walked away with the data and you're holding them ransom. You have ransomware encrypted their systems. Usually ransomware encryption is the only time an external file comes into the network, and then it encrypts the entire network. So it's usually the last stage of the attack. They've come together, a group of team of very sharp engineers have come together and said, okay, these are all the different ways in which an attack can happen. Each of these can be exhibited in multiple ways, but essentially the baseline remains the same. So if you are able to reliably detect these techniques, then you know where the attacker is. They did not make a distinction of this is only on the endpoint, this is only on the network, this is only on the proxy server, this is only on the switch, this is only so. They did not make that detection. They looked at it as holistic as possible. When all the industry started mapping themselves against the MITRE matrix, they realized that there are shortfalls because you're not looking at it holistically. Then the industry coined the term XDR, extended detection and response, which was nothing but what we started doing back in 2018, which is what Gartner recognized us for, and saying, okay, you need to look at it holistically. But they didn't call it that. They came up with a much stronger marketing term than a unified cyber defense platform, which we said. They came up with XDR, extended detection response, spent millions of dollars on that marketing. Today, the end customer is confused. What is going on, right? Then there came OpenXDR initiative, which essentially is trying to explain what XDR is to customers who do not understand what XDR is and help them understand, right? Essentially, this has been there for ages. We always looked at this data in unison. We were looking at it in silos. We just needed to look at it in unison. There was no need for more and more acronyms, but that's how the world works.
Okay, interesting. Who else is there? Is CrowdStrike also there now in XDR?
CrowdStrike is the pioneer of using that term XDR. So
Okay.
they practically coined the term and made Gartner cough it out.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So they practically coined the term. So CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, now Sophos. Sophos is still talking MDR. They're not talking XDR. Trend is talking MDR. They're still not talking XDR. But essentially, the bane of cybersecurity industry is that all vendors speak exactly the same language on their website. It'll become very hard for you to know whether he's actually a DLP vendor or a threat management company or a threat intelligence company or a cybersecurity endpoint company or a network detection company unless you get into page 2, page 3. Front page, everybody says the same thing. Using AI, using ML, single pane of glass, right? Stop threats and stop attackers. These 5 things everybody says.
What is single
Unfortunately,
pane of glass?
it's a very abused term in this specific industry, right? When I say single pane of glass, I mean I'm looking at everything in one screen and I'm able to make a determination without having to jump from one tool to the other, to the other, to the other, right? Everything is integrated so I can see a story end to end. None of them have it, honestly. I mean, even CrowdStrike has brought Humio just for that purpose and they still don't have it. FireEye has bought one company. Cisco has unbelievably brought too many companies. Everything is a different tool. Nothing maps to each other. The only link there is a hyperlink pointing you to the other tool. That's the best they have gotten to. And it is very real, right? Some of us who are listening on the show, if you're architects, you know that when you actually start integrating different tools that have been architected differently, it becomes a nightmare to actually make them integrate. Your best bet is to just get them to talk just enough, but you can't come up with a single schema, you can't come up with a single platform to hold all of that information and build something valuable. It is very hard work. I mean, we've seen billion-dollar companies fail, so we know it is hard work. Unlike that, BluSapphire was built ground up to be a single platform. So it's not a bolt-on solution. Like I saw, you see most of the bikes on the street making too much noise or too flashy or very big handlebar that came in. It was not designed for that bike like that. I mean, these integrations never really work very well when a bike is actually built ground up to support those kind of things, right? So that kind of a analogy I can give you. So when you build something built on, where from ground up you have designed it to be accommodative, from ground up you have designed it to be a single pane of glass, from ground up you have designed it to be a single data platform that is actually open in nature, it's a very different discussion versus tying in different pieces together.
Okay. You mentioned DLP, that you said that on the website it's not clear whether this is endpoint or MDR or DLP. What is DLP?
Data leakage prevention.
Okay. And
So essentially, it is like, there are regulators who do not want you to publish or lose customer data in clear text, right? Essentially, that says that, you should not be transmitting. For example, PCI is a great example because it's used across the world. It says your credit card information should never be transmitted in plain text. Okay.
and
And if it is, it should always be encrypted. Now, how do I know that data is going out? I need to monitor the wire and sense the wire and see all the data transmissions going across and then try to detect it from there. So these systems are trying to detect if some data is getting leaked. And now this could be a malicious attacker leaking data out also. But trust me, when a malicious attacker tries to leak data out, you will never find it. At least not by doing these systems, because it's very easy to build your own encryption these days. You really don't have to use existing algorithms, or you can actually do something very fancy yourself in a matter of minutes, and these systems will fall flat on its face.
okay. So a DLP is just able to check if data is going out unencrypted.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Got it.
And there are proxy companies, proxy software companies. There are companies that are actually doing identity management. All of these, if you look at the front page, everybody claims the same thing. These 5 points: single pane of glass, stop threats, stop attacks. I don't, and AI, ML.
Mm.
To the extent
Okay.
that I have a close friend who calls it Malai. I know what Malai means. It's ML and AI. You have to have Malai. दूध के साथ मलाई तो लेना ही है.
Okay. Okay. So, uh, what are the? uh, See, I'm assuming that a company which has, let's say, 52, so for example, I run a recruitment business in addition to podcasting, so I have about, let's say, 35, 40 recruiters on my payroll, and we use a couple of cloud technology tools, like a couple of SaaS tools. So someone like us would never need XDR, right?
You may be surprised. Uh, you at this point you don't have any visibility, so you are actually living with the happiness that you don't know what you don't know,
But
right?
everything I'm using has its own. So, for example, let's say we're using Salesforce for ERP. So, Salesforce has its own security. You're using Gmail for communication. Gmail has its own Gmail, and the whole Google suite, like spreadsheets, presentations, everything is on the Google suite. Um, and then we are, like, let's say, using LinkedIn for sourcing. So, I mean, all of these tools are coming with their own security, right? So why would a company like us, which is using a bunch of SaaS tools to run their business, need XDR?
So let me put it this way. So you're thinking about it wrong, right? You're thinking about that, each of these SaaS tools have their own security. So we don't use anything else other than this. So we don't have a large database in our systems for some attacker to steal or so on and so forth. Let's think about it from the thought process of what if an attacker gets into your system and is able to impersonate you? What happens then? For a moment, let's forget about professional life. Let's just think about what kind of havoc it would leak in your personal life. If an attacker is able to impersonate you, point your friends in the wrong direction, mislead your friends, family, what kind of havoc then can they cause? And if they're constantly recording what's going on your system, how many bank accounts will they get access to? A lot of us have Macs, right? I mean, as secure as they are still vulnerable to threats. And the reason I picked the case of Mac, but which is now also available in Windows now with Android, is that your text messages come into your Mac also,
Yeah.
right? And the same feature is now available with a lot of good branded, expensive Android phones on Windows. You can have that sidecar facility where all your texts are also displayed on your laptop, so you can respond to them immediately.
Or
Do you
with
think I
Chromebook,
really need your
it's
two-factor
native.
authentication anymore?
Mm.
Your text-based authentication, do I need it anymore if I get access to your system? I'm not
Right.
going to touch your LinkedIn. I'm just going to reach out on LinkedIn. Out of the thousands of outreaches you do, I'm going to make few more outreaches on LinkedIn to your long-term connects and ask them for money, or ask them for professional private information, or ask them and lure them into clicking on links that they will trust, because the trust factor is with you, not with the attacker, right?
Right.
So when Akshay sends a link and says, "Hey, this is absolutely funny. In my entire 20 years of recruitment, I've never seen like something like this," 90% of them will click on it, right?
Right.
And that then now I have baited others. And so, for example, I send out an email to all your employees from LinkedIn, because all of you guys are active on LinkedIn, and say, "Hey, you know what? This is a strong initiative from us. We need to start bolstering. This year, we're going to double our revenues. These are the updated policies. This is the market strategy. More information, click here." Done. I honestly don't necessarily need to know your data, know your logins, know anything, right? Most of this can be done. But a lot of these scenarios start to crop up, right? Your two-factor is defeated. Now I can start destroying your clients' reputations. I can get into most of your clients, because all of your clients trust you, because you probably have those relationships for a long years. And I can start getting into all of your clients. This is called supply chain attacks. Essentially, you pick the lowest hanging fruit and then go after that and start going after the big guy. And your clients are actually working for larger clients. They are working for some other larger clients. That is how I gain my entry into a large enterprise, not by directly focusing on a large enterprise. That's not how I'm going to do it, right? So at this point, you will be that lowest hanging fruit. So security at every level is important. Awareness at every level is very, very important. As part of our onboarding process and as part of our regular policy reviews, security awareness training is a very mandatory piece that we very strongly look at. I think we do it almost semi-annually. And onboarding, it's mandatory. Like, we sit with them, we help them understand. It's not a video that gets played out. Yes, it is a video that gets played out, but it is played out along with us, explaining the impact of what a single compromise from your end could mean, because that is your weakest link. As they say, human firewall is the weakest link at this point, because all of these attackers now know that that is where they have a higher chance of success. Rest everything, yes, we have technologies. If it's not BluSapphire, it's CrowdStrike. If it's not CrowdStrike, it's Cisco. If it's not Cisco, it is FireEye, somebody else. Will get detected at some point, right? All of us know how to detect it. But if some attacker, some user getting impersonated doing it willingly, it's a very hard problem to solve, because a lot of it is a psychology issue, not necessarily a technology issue, right?
Okay. And this is called social engineering, right? Like trying to uh,
100%,
defeat the
100%,
human firewall. Okay. So,
100%.
got it. I mean, okay. So while you can technically justify why a small company like what I run would need XDR, but I'm sure if you created like an ideal customer profile, I would not fall into that, right? So who is your ideal customer profile?
Well, our company's mission is to build enterprise class security for medium enterprises. And that has been the mission of the organization. Now we are extending it towards micro enterprises like yours. Yes, you wouldn't need the kind of large infrastructure needed to run security as other companies, but you would need some lightweight protection yourself, right? And how do an organization like that protect itself? Now, we'll park that for a little bit, because I want to focus on our core focus. Our mission was to bring that enterprise class security possible for medium enterprises, because we believe that the threats are the same, the challenges are the same, but they don't have the right resources to manage it, right? And with that mission, we started building our products and tool sets aimed at the medium enterprises. And when we say medium enterprises, we're talking anywhere between 50, 100 million in revenue, all the way up to 2 billion in revenue. Now, we do have customers with 6 to 8 billion in range, and some of them are about 12 to 14 billion in range. But our ideal market size is that we are focusing on is the medium enterprises.
And
And largely our customer base, 90% of our customer base today is in North America. We honestly want to change that. Trust me, as an Indian company, we honestly want to change that and be in a position to say, hey, you know what, more than 80% of our customer base is in India. But from a maturity cycle, it is going to take some time. We are far ahead in some areas and quite a distance to go in some areas. So we're looking forward to it. We personally believe 2025 is the year of cybersecurity in India. And that's what I'm betting on. And that's what I'm telling my folks, that this turnaround will happen. Revenue-wise, it may be different, but from a customer count perspective, I think the regulations will start flowing in. Couple of hits, couple of fines, regulatory interventions will start driving that in India. And I think we'll have to wait till early 2025, mid 2025, for that to actually start taking off. It started to take off now, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of local companies that are actually interested in securing themselves thanks to the ransomware attackers. No thanks to any of us. Thanks to the ransomware attackers who have made this possible. But it's still not a board level issue in India. That is actually some concern, but it's changing.
so essentially, you would look at companies which have a position of a CISO, what you also used to be like a chief information security officer.
A virtual CISO or somebody like that. In some cases, like, up until up until, 150, 200 million, most companies have a CIO who is doubling up as a CISO.
Okay.
Or they've hired a virtual CISO.
A CIO and a CTO is the same thing. I mean, in India, typically most startups have a CTO rather than a CIO. What is the difference?
I think CTO is more technology focused, is focused very heavily on the technology stack. CIO function is more comprehensive than just technology stack. It's both people, process, and technology function for the CIO. But for the CTO, it's more about the architecture design of the corporate technologies and how they play in. It's more of an architect role for the CTO.
I guess probably companies which are building SaaS products will have a CTO who's like
Yes, more technology
leading the.
focused. Not necessarily. There are companies like, banks and others who actually use CTOs and CIO roles. It's a more comprehensive role than what is CTO. CTO more technology, CIO more business function and board focused.
Okay, got it. Okay, and so you're saying that you want to also extend your product further to micro enterprises. So you would create like a lightweight version of the product for them, or?
Yes. So we are looking at a lightweight version of the product for the micro enterprises. The idea is to do a self-serviceable model for the micro enterprises that does not need any deployment cycle or any heavy lifting from the micro enterprises themselves. So it's going to be very, very light touch for the micro enterprises. So it's as simple as, like, you guys didn't need huge kind of efforts to sign up for LinkedIn or sign up for your own antivirus that you have on your systems or any other SaaS products. We want to keep it that level of light touch where we handle most of the policies on the back end for you. And you can customize those to your wish if you want to, or we will provide the support on that back. This is something that we've been playing with for the last 1.5 years. Now we're very confident that we built a very scalable platform for that. And now the biggest challenge is obviously getting the word out there.
Okay, interesting. Can you help me understand what is your product at its core? You are capturing data which is being generated at the endpoint, which is the device of the consumer, and the data which is the communication between device and network, and all of that is getting put into a database, and there is some sort of a way to parse the data to figure out if there is some unusual behavior. Is that what it is?
At a very, very nascent level, yes, that is correct. right? I mean, the data interactions are not just between your device. There's so many security tools, security layers in between, right? We're looking at data from every single layer. We're looking at the flow data. We're looking at the endpoint data. We're looking at user activity from a domain, from any other identity management tool. We're looking at vulnerability management data. We're looking at network traffic analytics. We're looking at file behavior, user behavior, entity behavior, and bringing all of these data points together from multiple data sets and bringing them onto a common schema to stitch them together and use machine learning algorithms and some artificial intelligence models to figure out where there is actually a critical alert and where the alert has a real attack that is behind it, which needs to be solved right now, and what are the things that you can solve in the next 5 days, right? Essentially, that's what we're trying to do. And this takes a lot of time and effort in security operations centers. Today's security operations centers are largely overwhelmed with the number of alerts, right? A typical security operation analyst life is very boring. They usually look at the alerts, verify that it's done, close the ticket, so on and so forth, and they're being measured for the wrong things. How quickly can they look at the ticket? How quickly can they own the ticket? Is what they're being measured on, which is actually a wrong measurement. It is okay for an IT system, but it's not okay for a security system. A security system is how efficiently am I able to manage that information and how efficiently am I able to make a determination whether something is a false positive or is actually an incident. That becomes really important, for which triage is very important. So the level 1 analyst, level 2 analyst, level 3 analyst, and the skill scarcity is actually real in cybersecurity, right? I'm sure skill scarcity must exist in other areas of infrastructure, information technology, but in cybersecurity, it is a very real problem. And when I said this the other day, some other podcaster was mentioning, hey, I see people applying for all kinds of jobs, and we open up one role and I receive 100 resumes. And I'm like, that does not mean you have the skill. That only means you have a number of people interested. My problem is that, and my problem and many clients that I talk to is, it's not that they cannot find people, it's that they cannot find people with the right skill. And that is the problem, right? And that skill scarcity is real. And if you look at it, right, I mean, we had information technology for what, last 40, 50 years. And there have been professional education training institutes offering this kind of, when I say graduate level, postgraduate level courses for the last 35 years. Cybersecurity is brand new. So that skill gap does exist. I'll still rely on that and say that if I can get people to operate at one level above there, if I can allow analysts to punch above their weight, then I call it a success. Right? If I can make it very easy for the analyst to understand this is an attack without him having to put too much effort, then I think it's a strong value proposition, and that's what we are here to do. Right? Before the analyst even looks at the alert, the triage is already done, the storyboard is laid out, the response and remedial actions are also laid out. If you want us to take automated action, we have our own source, security orchestration, automation, and response tools that we can use to do this. Or you can point and click and get it done. It's really up to you. And bringing all of that together is what we really do at scale. And that's what we really excel at. Case in point, having built ground up, we're very efficient in our operations. So we're able to do this at a cost that is totally unheard of. I mean, this podcast may be a good place to announce it also, right? So we're able to offer to our customers $1.25 per gigabit on a consumption-based model, which essentially is what cloud is, right? Today, you don't pay for AWS by number of instances. You pay by how much CPU you're utilizing, how much data transfer you're doing, how much storage you're doing, how much memory, so on and so forth. It's a pure consumption-based model. And we believe that being a SaaS company, we should also be a very consumption-based model, not necessarily a per-user license, per endpoint license, per EPS license, which actually is very confusing to the end customers. So we're going with a per, and especially when our specific customers, our direct customers are turning out to be service providers, not necessarily the end client himself, because most clients are getting rid of their internal teams and outsourcing it to a service provider for efficiency and to address the skill problem at large, and saying, hey, my job is to do research and build tablets and syrups and other things. Why am I spending so much time in cybersecurity, right? Or my job is to build widgets and moisturizing cream, or build cups, vases, whatever I do, my widgets. Why am I spending so much time in cybersecurity, right? Let me outsource it to a subject matter expert, which is a service provider, and let him handle. And I'll only be responsible for the outcomes. He will be responsible for the execution, management, and ownership, right? So this
These
is the
service
correct.
providers could be like, say, an Infosys, Wipro, or like who are these?
Those are what we call as solution integrators. The areas are little great in India, but largely diverse in more advanced countries. Take it with a pinch of salt, especially if you look at the evolution of cybersecurity. The West has always been a little ahead of India. Take a look at technology evolution. India has always been ahead of the West. So right? So in Europe and affluent Europe and in US, service providers handle a lot of this. Managed security service providers are very different from solution integration
Any
integrators.
big name that I would have heard of? And
Dell SecureWorks.
okay,
SecureWorks is name. Verizon Business is one of those names. AT&T
okay,
Business is one of those names. Right? A lot of these people do managed security services at tier one level.
okay. And
Right?
any
These are
Indian
one of the biggest
Indian name?
players out there. I don't know. I have never looked at something as an Indian name or an
Okay.
American name. Pardon me,
Yeah, I
because
mean, like,
because you only know. See, the Tech Mahindra, the Infosys, the TCS, the Wipros, all of these are existing in US market as managed service providers also.
mm,
In India, SIs are also doing the MSSP work. It's
okay.
very uncommon. Like, the Cognizants of the world are also doing MSSP work.
Mm,
That happens to be one of their business lines. But when you look at the markets, right, those are more at a large enterprise level. For the medium enterprises that we are focused on, they work so a lot with security service providers who are MSSPs, managed security service providers, not SIs or anybody else. So that it turns out to be our core market, because the whole market is moving towards a pay-as-you-go model, if you will, right? Everything we are doing today is a pay-as-you-go model. Most building apartments today, even your electricity is a pay-as-you-go model anymore. So I think it makes more sense for us to actually start that revolution and say, hey, you know what? Don't worry about owning anything. Just pay as you go, right?
and
Pay for only what you use. Pay for only what you consume. That's it.
what is the difference between MSSP and MDR?
So your MSSP is responsible for the care and feed of the appliances also. Your MDR is responsible for the outcomes and proactive detection of threats. MSSP is more reactive. MDR is more proactive. At least
Okay.
that's the expectation of the market.
Mm. Okay. Got it. Okay. So what you're saying is that your customers end up largely being MSSPs, and you're charging them
MSSPs and MDR providers.
an MDR provider. Okay. And you charge them $1.25 per GB. What is a GB here? A GB of data that
It's a
you're
gigabit
storing?
of data that we have ingested from the customer to process the logs, raw logs, whatever, and make sense out of it, right? That's
So,
what we're talking
so
about.
this GB is also getting stored in your data center, or from this GB, some part of it is stored in your data center? Like you are
Actually, all of it is stored within our data centers,
okay.
within our cloud environments.
Mm,
Now, we stand very unique in this space today, where we offer the capability to use our SaaS platform, but still store the data within your environment. That is something that no other provider in this ecosystem does. We are the pioneers of that. We allow people to keep the data within their own environment and only use our interfaces for that. That's something that's very, very unique to us.
okay. Okay. For an MSSP, this makes a lot more sense because they would want to have that, like they would see that as more proprietary, the data, and they would want to not really share it out with their vendor further.
Yes. So MSSPs actually don't want to keep that data. They don't want to manage the infrastructure. They don't want to manage the software. They only want to manage the outcomes for their clients.
Mm,
So they're more than happy to let us keep that. But there are some banks, financial institutions, clients that want to keep the data themselves, but still want these capabilities. Those kind of customers we are able to address, right? There is no other vendor in the market today, including Exabeam, CrowdStrike, Humio, whoever you pick. All the data has to be given to them. We don't have that requirement. We stand
Okay.
pretty unique in that space.
Okay. Okay. So essentially, your product has two broad capabilities. One is ingesting data, and second is uh, parsing the data, or like creating intelligence based on the data, right?
On streaming, so we do that not at rest. We
Hmm.
do that while the data is streaming itself,
Okay, real time, like creating
real
real
time.
time intelligence on that
Yes,
data. Uh,
yes.
for ingesting data, is this like between these two, which one was harder to build? Like, is it easy to ingest all the data which happens? Like, are there like well established pipes through which you can ingest that data, like through APIs and all that, or do you
No,
have to?
see, um, I honestly would say the detection engineering is the harder piece. Mapping them to a common schema is the harder piece. But I don't think pipelines are that hard. Pipelines are relatively easy to manage and control. But pipelines take more care and feed than detection engineering, if you will. Detection engineering is, yes, it's hard, but I would say it's
Once you've
relatively
built it.
easy and it's not monotonous. Pipeline building pipelines and working with these large say, data sets, and when most customers, when you work with them, they have some legacy systems for which you have to build parsers. That's a little monotonous. That can get a little monotonous.
Okay, okay, okay. So
But being able to provide that to visibility to our customers that they did not have for the last 10 years, that's eye-opening. And when the customer comes back and gives you that feedback, that is well worth the effort.
how did you build the intelligence? You have this whole bunch of data which you're ingesting through pipelines coming into your data center. How did you build intelligence that this is something which needs to be flagged, and this is how you find out that what happened before, what happened after? This is how you give a recommendation. This is the recommendation for this kind of a red flag, and so on.
So, I mean, I've close to 20 years of experience in the cybersecurity industry, and put together within my core team, we have close to a century of experience in the cybersecurity industry. A lot of that intelligence is coming from us, and a lot of research work that happens in this space. We have our own threat research team that is constantly vetting what we are doing versus what the industry is doing, and where we are landing up, how good our detections are, and what the attackers are doing, and where we need to go, what is the future state, so on and so forth. So we rely very heavily on our research teams. But at the same time, we also rely on a lot of signal intelligence data we get from our own sensors spread across 30 countries.
What
We
is
have
what is
an
this
extensive
signal intelligence
we
data?
have our own sensors that we spread across over 30 countries across the globe, and we listen for what kind of attacks are happening, what kind of attacks are being conducted against what kinds of applications, what is the most popular attack vector, who is doing what. And we also ingest data from sources like Verizon threat reports and AT&T threat reports, so on and so forth. So a lot of this data actually goes into as part of our research into building new detection models, faster detection, faster response, faster remediation. That's really cyber resilience delivered for you. That's what we're focused on.
What do you mean by sensor? I didn't get that. You
Oh,
have
sensors.
sensors
So
in.
when we say
Okay.
sensors, these are just small, lightweight systems that we host in multiple areas, multiple data centers
Hmm.
to look for malicious traffic and analyze it.
So, like, say there is this data center. I think Adani has a data center in Mumbai. So you would have a machine there, and that machine would be listening to what is happening in that data center, and trying to identify if there is
Who is
any.
it trying to attack that data center? What kind of attacks are coming in? What kind of attacks are going out? And all of that data we try to listen. Yes.
And this is with consent of the provider, the person running the data center.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
We can't get any data without the consent of the actual provider himself.
Okay.
himself.
Okay. 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 Interesting. And why do they give you this
But that's why
permission?
there are, threat intelligence companies that work like Verizon and the AT&Ts of the world. See, Verizon, after it bought MCI WorldCom, it owns over, I think, close to 64% of the world's traffic goes through their pipeline.
Okay.
in some shape or form when they
The
bought MCI WorldCom.
fiber
I hope you
optic.
remember that was like 16, 18 years ago
Yeah,
that
yeah,
happened.
yeah.
So they became the owners of close to that level of traffic, and their intelligence is usually the best because they see the most traffic and they sense the most of it, right? And but the good news is a lot of these companies come together and share that intelligence with the rest of the world because there is no one winner, one loser when it comes to cybersecurity. We're all going to lose. We're all going to win, right? So I mean, if you're attacked, your clients can't say, "Hey, I don't really care if Akshay gets attacked." No, if Akshay gets attacked, also it becomes your problem,
Mm.
and your client gets attacked, his clients become problem. Have a problem on their hands. So it is not one I win, you lose kind of a situation, right? We all have to win together. We all have to lose together.
Okay, okay. So right now, how your intelligence happens is through like a directory approach. You are creating a directory of all possible threats through a research team and through like gathering information through the sensors and so on. So that's how the intelligence happens.
Yes. And there are
Okay.
many threat intelligence companies that actually specialize only on threat intelligence, which is like telling you, hey, this Russian attacker is coming from this address and he's trying to deploy these kind of files and so on and so forth. We consume that data also. Commercial threat feeds that customers subscribe to, we can actually take a feed from any of those sources also. So it's not that only our generated data will be given. You have freedom to choose what you want. Like, I mean, as I said, I started this company because I did not have the freedom to do what I want. So,
Okay. So, would you say right now XDR is what version one of antivirus was, like a directory approach, and like the version one
so
antivirus
see,
had
it has
directories
always
of.
been what was needed was always been an XDR, and essentially this is going to become a data problem. And we've been saying it for over a decade that security is a big data problem. Security is not specific detection, specific ML or anything like that, right? All of this collectively comes together and becomes a big data problem, and that's what we are also solving here. While most of our competitors say 30 days hot, 40 days hot, 60 days hot. We are saying
What is
unlimited.
heart? What?
Hot is the amount of data you can have online, and the
Okay,
rest of the data goes and sits in an archive,
okay.
right? It's very interesting when we come out and say, with our new release, we are today able to provide unlimited hot storage without charging anything extra. So all of your data is available for you in a split second for you to analyze whenever you need to. So today the problem is if I have a 30-day hot, that means that at any given point, last 30 days worth of data is actually available for me. If I need to look at data from January, so for example, today we are sitting at October 2023. If I want to go back to January and look for the data because my auditor is asking or because I saw a threat or I got intelligence that there was an attack that happened on my network or from my network, and a threat intelligence company has reported to the regulator and regulator wants me to verify, I cannot load that data. I have to pay extra. That data has to get loaded, analyzed, and only then I'll be able to work with it, right? And that may be January, that may be 1 month, that may be 30 days, that may be 300 days. So you really don't know. And it's humongous work, right? For these companies to actually go look for that kind of work. In the world of BluSapphire, if you are a BluSapphire customer, you just switch the date to January and you're there. There's really no dependence on anything else. Data is always online. So we're doing this with a very large provider in the US. They don't want to be named, but they are one of the world's largest trading platform providers and finance company. And they use a particular SIM, which is our competitor, and they send all the data archives to S3 buckets. We now today they are actually moving towards giving all that data to us because today they have it on S3, but they don't have any capability to work with that data after it hits the S3 bucket.
What is S3 bucket?
It's a storage blob.
Okay.
So for an S3 bucket, right? Essentially, we all know storage as being attached to a compute unit. Like if you have a hard disk, your laptop is actually the one that is actually attached to that hard drive in your system, and that's how you have access to it. You connect a USB drive or something, and then you have a backup drive, and that's how you have access to that storage. Otherwise, that storage is not online. To bring that storage online, you have something called NAS systems, network attached storage systems, that vendors are willing to sell you, which you can actually attach into your network, and from anywhere within your network, you can reach it. Now, extrapolate that to a global scale, right? And anywhere from internet, you are able to reach it. That becomes your S3 in short.
Okay. So you're saying that one big USP of BluSapphire is that a CISO or a security team can read data which is even a year old. Is this data readable by humans? I mean, what do you mean when you
Through
say
our
that?
interfaces, we provide a very fast analytical user interface that they can actually use to read the data, query the data, perform analytics on it, all in near real time, irrespective of how old that data was.
What is like what? Give me an example. Like you'll tell them this was the network traffic or this was the amount of
Say, for
GBs.
example, right, a CertFin, or let's just take an example of a banker, some banker X in India, and Certain came back and said, "Hey, we've
Cert
detected
is
say a computer emergency response team, and they are usually responsible for all cyber intelligence to nation state that affect nation state, to the organizations that are too big to fail for the nation.
hmm.
Right? They share that intelligence within the
So cert
organization.
is like
So
a government thingy, like
government-driven regulatory board, government-driven entity that does not have direct influence, but that is responsible for sharing and acting on all nation-state attacks and assets that the nation deems critical.
hmm. Okay.
Banking sector being one of them.
Hmm. Okay.
It could be oil and gas. It could be anything, right? I just taking a banker X,
Hmm.
and a lot of these customers today, they do process logs, they do look for threat intelligence matches and all of that, and then they archive that data as regulated by the regulatory provider. Maybe he's asking them to store data worth of 2 years, quite possible. Then 6 months down the line, Certain comes in and says, "Hey, we saw a Russian attacker targeting you." I'm just taking names randomly. And we see that going back, we came across some data which was 6 months old and that got published just now. And that information is 6 months old, and that information belongs to you. Can you go back and tell us how this happened? And confirm that that attacker is no longer in your network. How are you going to do that? If you don't have the data, you will have to bring that data back from archives, load it back to your indexing systems, whatever they are, and then start going at piecemeal basis. If you're a customer of BluSapphire, you just launch the BluSapphire tool, change the dates to the relevant dates, and start looking for the data right away. There's no time gap, there's no compute, additional storage, additional infrastructure that you have to stand up just to process this data. None of that exists.
What are you
You,
looking for when you load that date?
it could be anything. It could be network footprint, it could be network traffic, it could be data exfiltration, it could be a log activity that some data was lost, or it could be user credentials that were compromised, or there were login details from an external third party, which were supposed to be maybe in Mumbai, and you saw login from somewhere outside the country, or all that kind. Any of that could be an identifier, and any of that could be an artifact for that matter. And you're looking for all of that information. For you to load all of that data, build all that infrastructure on demand, and then load all of that data, process that information, and dedicate infrastructure for that, and all of that is a huge headache. With BluSapphire, all you need is a browser.
Got it.
Just
Okay.
change the relevant dates and look for the data you want. It's already there, pre-tagged in most cases.
Okay. How do you sell? How do you get a get your foot in the door? How do you convert from an initial lead into a sales? Do you have some
Understood.
best practices around it which you have discovered that this is what works best for us? And because you're selling in North America, so it's a very competitive market. You're competing with, let's say, a CrowdStrike, which is like a well-known brand and so on. So how do you manage to sell?
And you bring up a very important question, right? And especially this is a problem for a lot of Indian startups. Indian startups are not known for their product prowess. They're very well known for their service capabilities across the globe, but not for product prowess, and especially not for cybersecurity prowess. Israel is the go-to country for most of these companies, and they believe in that prowess coming from Israel, not necessarily from India. Well, this is a change of perception we have to fight. That goes without saying, and it's a process. But more importantly, so right, cybersecurity is a big issue primarily because, and especially where we operate. We operate at the core of cybersecurity in the Security Operations Center, and we offer an entire platform. And it would be foolish of us to expect that somebody will actually totally replace everything they're using and use us. That doesn't happen. Some cases it does, but most cases it doesn't. Most cases, customers look at what is the difference between what they're using today and what we can offer, and just buy that difference and start with that. Maybe it's agentless threat hunting. Maybe it is network behavior analytics. Maybe it is UEBA, whatever the case might be. Those are the things usually customers start with. And as they start seeing the value of the platform and the efficiency, they start spreading and retiring their existing technology debt and taking more and more of BluSapphire modules into their ecosystem. That is typically how we sell. A large portion of our sales has moved into service providers. That's practical truth. I think it's global truth everywhere. Because everything in security has turned into a service, and we don't want to be a service company, so we typically work with service companies. And security is a hard sell for multiple reasons, right? It's very easy for customers or some folks to compare them and say, hey, you know what, we're able to sell so fast and effectively. But that may be an ancillary piece that a customer needs and may be able to survive in case of a catastrophe in that area. And that could be anywhere from, a sale doesn't stop because Salesforce is not online, right? Or a ticketing system is offline doesn't stop infrastructure from being managed. But when security malfunctions, it hits at the core of the organization. So it is like replacing your engine and asking you to buy an inferior quality engine for your car. That nobody will do. And it takes time to build brand presence in that area as opposed to any other area. I'm not saying other areas are not difficult.
But
I'm just trying to set the perspective that this is actually a very difficult area to break through because you said, there are big brands in US and it's a very difficult area to break through because customers look for that trust value, and trust is not earned overnight, especially with something that they hold as close to their chest.
so you don't actually need to convince the end customers as much. If you're selling to MSSPs, then your your sales pitch is not about security is important, but rather about how my product is better for you.
No, that is the sad part, right? The customer is also interested in what is being used by the MSSP to secure his environment, and he wants to have a big say in that area. So a lot of what the customer does and feels is very important. The very few customers in the space, maybe micro enterprises say, hey, I don't care, this is what I need. But a lot of them just want to know what is being used, irrespective of whether they want to have a say in it or not. So evangelization with the end customer becomes very important for us. There's almost no deal that we have not spoken to the end customer, showcased our prowess to them and our capabilities, and we've not gone into a POC battle. Those doesn't happen. Almost every customer we meet, irrespective of whether it is through a service provider or it is a lead that has come directly from us.
Okay, got it. What kind of revenues do you do currently? What this year? What will
We're
you?
hitting close to 3 million right now, and we're looking north of 6 million by March. We'll see how that goes. I think we're trying to be very aggressive in a down market, but I think we have what it takes.
Okay, and you've done a fundraise also, right? I think around 9 million.
Yes, we raised about 9.2 million, Series A, and had some global investors participate, and we raised it in India.
Oh, you raised it in India. Okay. Why did you choose to raise it in your company is incorporated in India, or where's your?
Yeah, company is incorporated in India, and
Hmm.
we have an extended arm that is 100% subsidiary owned in the US that operates independently in the US. Except for financial reporting, it doesn't actually tie into the company, but yes, it's 100% owned and operated as an Indian entity.
Why did you choose that, like to incorporate in India? Because you've spent a lot of time
Um,
in the US. You could have just started off in the US only.
that's what you would think. But the fun thing is, for my entire time I spent in the US, I've never thought of starting a company. I've always remained a geek, technologist. I still am a technologist at heart. And I love technology discussions, participating in technology conversations. That has been my core strength. Architecture, cybersecurity, defense, attack, all of these areas. I've built my career ground up in those areas, and that still remains my primary passion. With that being my primary passion, I didn't interact with the community that much. I was very closed into my own shell. But that's also not why we did not raise in US. We primarily raised in India because that's where the product was actually built. The entire product was built out of India. I moved to India just to build the product, and we thought it was actually appropriate for us to do it that way.
Uh, was it hard to raise
Honestly,
funds
India is a lot
in
harder
India?
to work. India is a lot harder country to do business in than in US. I'll give you that at any cost. India is much harder to raise capital and work with capital with respect to regulatory compliances and other stuff, as opposed to the United States. But I think we did what we did, and we are very happy how we did it.
How did the fundraise happen? Did you like? Was it like a journey of like lots and lots of no's before you heard a yes, or did you have credibility already, and so it was not that difficult, or like?
And we are going to be on air. I'm not going to say we heard no's at all. I have to market myself. You put me in a hard position. But yes, it is going to be a journey of no. It's going to be a journey of yes, and it's going to be journeys of maybes. It's going to be a journey of yeses that actually don't materialize. My advice is that just understand that a lot of this investment happens when you and your investor are in the same place at the same time with respect to your thought processes and what he is thinking also. A lot of it, when you hear a no, a lot of it is not because of you or your product. Well, some of it maybe you'll need to be able to make that distinction yourself, but a lot of it has to do with what the investor profile is and what he's committed to investing in, and it may not match with what you are trying to do, and that's usually why you hear no. Right? And the investment community is very professional for that matter. Actually, I've had really, really good conversations where people were more than willing to offer help in making connections. I've been asked share information that they have that they're privy to in the market, so on and so forth. So, and it is my experience in US is also similar. Right? When I speak to investors from US, the experience is similar. So as an investor community, they are committed to investing. It's just that you and your investor have to be at the same place, both psychologically, financially, and economically for this to work. So that's something that you have to understand.
Okay, got it. Okay. Um, you said that there are regulatory changes you anticipate in India, which will make 2025 as the year of cybersecurity in India. Give me a broad overview. What's happening on the regulatory front with respect to
Some of the data
cybersecurity?
privacy regulations that are coming on board, and they need to find their teeth while they come on board. I mean, the SEBI does a good job of maintaining control. RBI does a good job of doing this, but bringing something into law is a very different aspect from bringing something into a regulatory compliance mode. Law is a law, right? And it is punishable by jail time. It is punishable by some real hard facts that will hit you. Compliance usually is a slap on the wrist. If you don't comply, you get to pay some fine and move on, and so on and so forth. So I think the law needs to get time to gain teeth, grow, and become as widespread as it needs to. It'll take a couple of years. And I think that's where
Is there
IC
a specific
2025.
law, like a one flagship law, which you think will be a game changer?
No, in India it is DPDP,
Which is what?
uh,
What is full form?
data privacy law that just got launched, right? And I think data localization laws in India will also grow. We already started asking most of the multinational companies to store India citizens' data within Indian boundaries. So these kind of things will actually start expanding globally, and data privacy will become big. The challenge always has been why security is a little slow to pick up in India is that people don't care about their privacy that much. We always been such tight knit communities that privacy was something that was never given a top seat,
Uh,
right? I mean, everybody is nosy and everybody is into everybody's business. But I think that's changing slowly because they understand it's not about being nosy or people knowing about you. It's what they can do as they impersonate you. And larger portion of that is not necessarily because the government is doing a great job of vocalizing that information, or the community itself is doing a great job of vocalizing that information. They are, but not really. It's more the financial loss that individuals are facing across that is allowing them to learn those lessons very, very fast, right? The phishing attacks, the phone phishing attacks, the banking frauds that most individuals are getting impacted by, that is where the reality is hitting. I was surprised by this little story I want to share with you. I had a driver that I booked for Delhi when I was in Delhi last year, not even last year, 2 years ago, to take me around because I was tired of getting through Ubers and waiting for them and so on. At the end of the day, I would pay the same amount, so I just booked the driver for the entire day. He was sharing with me how his mobile gets information and he's being fished for PIN on his car. And he's like, they were so convincing when they called me, Sahib. To see, they were actually talking about my bank account. They were talking about the loans I had. They knew pretty much where I live. They knew what I do for a living. They pretty much sounded so genuine. So I gave them the pin and I lost 5,000 rupees, which may not be much, but it is still a lot for somebody who works on a day labor basis, right? So, and the lesson he learned out of it was more interesting, right? He's like, he still does use his phone a lot and does financial banking, everything through his phone, but he knows immediately how to identify fraudulent calls now, right? So I think that is doing a much better job than what others can. And it's all about security awareness, right? We do this at enterprises, like in our organization, as I said, right? It's part of our onboarding, but we also ensure that they take those lessons back home because it's not just our employee, it is our employee's family as well that needs to be cyber secure for BluSapphire to remain cyber secure.
yeah, the supply chain attack.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Cool. Cool. Any last words of advice for people who are looking to become founders? You became a founder fairly late in your life. So for someone who's like you, thinking of should they become a founder or not, any advice?
Largely a personal choice, but it opened up my world. I never realized I was living in a cocoon. There's a very popular saying, Kupastha Mandukam, frog
What
in a
is it?
well,
Ah. Okay. Ah. Mm, mm.
right? I never knew what was happening outside my comfort zone. This really opened up. If you are say getting into this to say, hey, I want to be a master of my own domain. I don't want to report to anybody. I want to be the king and all that. Yeah, you're in for a big surprise
Yeah.
because
You're
now you
right.
report, yeah, because now you report to everybody in your organization,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
not
All
just your,
your
not just
investors,
your
your
investors, not just
customers.
anybody.
Yeah.
You report to every employee in your organization, and you're answerable to every employee in your organization. So
Mm.
be very careful. But it is a fun journey, and I think the future is all about micro enterprises. That's where the future is. The long-term jobs and all of that is gone. If there's something that you want to explore, now is the time.
Mm.
It is really the golden era of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Do you see Blue Sapphire becoming a unicorn one day?
I don't believe in unicorns and popcorns. What I want to become is a billion-dollar company, and I have charted out my journey with that aspiration in mind. we'll get there. I don't want to do it overnight. I'm not big believer that things happen overnight. ठीक है, सिक्किम लॉटरी लगती है, किसी की लगती है, but सबकी नहीं लगती.
What's the path
So
to? You're saying $1 billion revenues?
$1 billion value,
Okay,
and I think we'll get there fairly quickly.
which would
And
mean
I
like
think
about 100 to 200 million revenue.
about 100 to 200 million in revenue. Yeah.
So
So
what's
yes,
the
and I
path
think
to
we'll get there fairly quickly.
with just this one product, or the micro enterprise second product that you have in mind also, or like?
Altogether, I think every because I think we have actually democratized security operations, and this is what will take us to the next billion, including our micro enterprise model. And we have the potential to be that next $1 billion company. We'll take our time. We're slow. We're patient.